On the night that was meant to honor me, I caught my own daughter-in-law slipping something into my glass. After 43 years of dedicated service, my retirement party should have been perfect. The golden balloons swayed gently from the ceiling, the 3-tier cake stood proudly on the main table, and everyone I loved was there to celebrate with me. But as I watched Sarah's emerald green dress shimmer under the warm lights, I never imagined I'd witness the most shocking betrayal of my life. My name is Margaret Harrison, and this is the story of how my retirement party became a night you'll never forget. Not for the speeches or the cake, but for the moment I realized that evil sometimes wears a beautiful dress and sits at your own family table. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel had been transformed into something magical. It took me back to my wedding day 35 years ago, when my beloved Harold and I danced under similar golden lights. Now, 6 months after his passing, this celebration felt bittersweet, yet hopeful. Golden streamers cascaded from the crystal chandeliers like frozen waterfalls, and my favorite jazz music, the same songs Harold and I used to dance to, played softly in the background. At 66, with my silver hair styled in an elegant chignon, and wearing my best navy blue dress with the pearl necklace Harold had given me for our last Christmas together, I felt like the queen of my own celebration. "Mom, you look stunning," my eldest son Michael approached me, his wife Sarah gliding beside him like a predator in emerald silk. "Dad would be so proud to see you tonight." "He is seeing me, son," I replied, touching the small photo of Harold I kept in my beaded evenings purse. "I can feel him here with us." The room buzzed with nearly 100 guests. There was my old boss, Patterson himself, now 82, but still sharp as a tack. Mrs. Henderson from next door, who'd been bringing me casseroles since Harold's funeral. My younger son David with his wife Elena, and their 2 children. My precious grandchildren who called me Grandma Maggie. College friends, church members, neighbors, colleagues from every decade of my career. "Congratulations, Mom!" Michael raised his glass, his proud smile warming my heart. 43 years at Patterson and Associates. You've earned this. The applause filled the room as colleagues, family, and old friends cheered. I had built a good life. A comfortable pension of $4,200 monthly awaited me. The family home worth $850,000 was paid off, and I had savings of nearly $300,000 that would ensure my golden years were truly golden. Everything I had worked for was finally mine to enjoy. But as I scanned the room, my eyes landed on Sarah, my daughter-in-law. She stood near the back, her emerald green satin dress catching the light. A $2,000 designer piece I'd noticed her admiring. In store windows, but that seemed beyond Michael's teacher salary. Something was off. While everyone else beamed with genuine joy, her smile seemed painted on, forced and brittle. Her dark eyes held a coldness that made me uneasy, like winter ice that never fully melts. I'd noticed it before, the way she looked, at our family home during Sunday dinners, how she'd run her fingers along Harold's antique furniture and ask, "How much do you think this is worth, Mom?" The subtle comments about when older generations should step aside for younger ones who know how to really live. The pointed questions about my retirement benefits, my life insurance policy, whether I'd updated my will recently. I dismissed it as idle curiosity. But tonight, something felt different. Dangerous. "Margaret," boomed a familiar voice. Jim Watson, my bridge partner for 15 years, approached with his wife Carol. "This is some party. Harold would have loved seeing you so honored." "He planned most of it," I admitted, my voice catching slightly. "Before he got sick, he made me promise. To have a real celebration. Don't you dare just retire quietly, he said. You've earned a party, Margaret Harrison. As we chatted about our upcoming cruise to Alaska, a dream Harold and I had shared, I caught glimpses of Sarah throughout the evening. She mingled, but there was something calculating in her movements, like a chess player positioning pieces for a final move. Sarah had married Michael 5 years ago, a whirlwind romance that had concerned Harold from the beginning. There's something about her eyes, Harold had whispered to me after their engagement party. They're always calculating, always measuring what she can gain from every situation. From the beginning, Sarah had shown an unusual interest in family finances. She'd hint about needing a bigger house. Michael deserves better than that tiny apartment, she'd say. Better cars. A teacher should drive something more respectable. Expensive vacations. We never get to travel like other couples, our age. Michael worked hard as a high school principal, earning $65,000 annually. But Sarah's appetite for luxury seemed insatiable. She worked part-time as a real estate agent, but her income was sporadic and largely spent on designer clothes, spa treatments, and expensive dinners at restaurants I couldn't pronounce. I often wondered if she saw me not as family, but as an obstacle to her dreams of wealth. With Harold gone and me living alone in our large house, I could see the wheels turning in her mind. How much would she inherit? How soon? What stood between her and the comfortable life she felt entitled to? Tonight, as I watched her laugh too, loudly at Patterson's old war stories and compliment Mrs. Henderson's dress with false sincerity, I realized Harold had been right to worry. Ladies and gentlemen. The hotel manager tapped his glass, and conversations quieted. We have a wonderful video tribute prepared by Ms. Harrison's colleagues. Please direct your attention to the screen. As the lights dimmed and old photos of my career flashed on the projection screen, I took the opportunity to observe the room more carefully. The video showed my early days as a junior accountant, my promotion to senior partner, company picnics with Harold by my side, award ceremonies where I'd received recognition for ethical business practices. But I wasn't watching the screen. I was watching Sarah. She stood near the drinks table, her attention clearly not on the video tribute, but on something else entirely. Her purse, that expensive emerald clutch that matched her dress, was clutched tightly in her hands. Every few seconds she'd glance around the room, checking to see if anyone was watching her. The video continued with testimonials from colleagues. Margaret Harrison is the most trustworthy woman I've ever worked with, said Patterson's son, who'd taken over the firm. If Margaret gave you her word, you could take it to the bank. Ironic, considering what I was witnessing. As my fellow employees shared stories of my integrity and dedication, Sarah moved closer to the champagne glasses, arranged for the upcoming toast. The hotel staff had prepared them earlier. Neat rows of crystal flutes filled with golden champagne, ready for the moment when I would address my guests. And now, the video narrator continued, let's hear from Margaret's beloved husband, Harold, recorded just last year at their 40th wedding. Anniversary! Harold's voice filled the room, and my heart clenched. My wife is a woman of principle, his recorded voice said, weak from the cancer that would claim him 6 months later, but still strong with conviction. She's spent her entire career doing the right thing, even when it was difficult, even when it cost her personally. That's the woman I married, and that's the woman I've loved for 40 years. Several guests dabbed their eyes with tissues. Even some of the men looked emotional. But Sarah? Sarah was focused entirely on those champagne glasses. Excuse me for a moment, I told my old colleague Jim, stepping away from our conversation. about cruise plans. I positioned myself near the appetizer table, pretending to examine the shrimp cocktail while keeping Sarah in my peripheral vision. That's when I saw it. Sarah approached the drinks table with calculated casualness, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. The video tribute continued playing, providing perfect cover as all eyes remained on the screen, showing photos of Harold and me dancing at various company parties over the decades. From her small emerald clutch, she retrieved what looked like a tiny glass vial, no larger than a perfume sample. My blood ran cold as I watched her uncap it with trembling fingers. Her hands shook slightly, not from nervousness but from anticipation. She poured the contents, a fine white powder that dissolved instantly, into one of the champagne flutes. The powder left no trace, no cloudiness, no evidence of tampering. Then, with the practiced ease of someone who had planned this moment, carefully, she placed that specific glass in a position where I would naturally reach for it during the upcoming toast. My heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. This couldn't be happening. Not at my retirement party, not from my own family. But as I watched Sarah step back, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth, the terrible reality hit me. My daughter-in-law was trying to poison me. The video ended with a photo of Harold and me from last Christmas, just weeks before his diagnosis. We looked so happy, so unaware of what was coming. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it over the rushing sound in my ears. The room continued its festive buzz around me, but I felt like I was watching everything through thick glass. Laughter seemed distant, the music muffled. All I could focus on was that champagne glass sitting there like a loaded weapon among the innocent others. But why? The question burned through my mind like acid. Was it the inheritance? My will left everything to my two sons equally, which meant Sarah would eventually inherit half of Michael's share, about $575,000 plus half the house value. Was it the life insurance policy? I carried $500,000 in coverage. Or was it simply that, as long as I was alive and healthy, I stood between her and the lifestyle she believed she deserved? I thought about Harold's collection of vintage watches, still sitting in our bedroom safe, the timepieces his grandfather had left him, worth at least $50,000. I'd promised to give them to my sons when they were ready for such responsibility. Had Sarah been counting on that windfall? Then I remembered something that made my stomach turn. Last month, Sarah had asked me about my medications. "Mom, you take so many pills," she'd said during Sunday dinner. "Don't you worry about mixing them up. Some combinations can be dangerous, you know." At the time, I'd thought she was showing concern for my health. Now I wondered if she'd been researching what might interact dangerously with whatever substance was now dissolving in that champagne glass. As the applause died down and guests began moving around again, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront her directly. Not yet. I needed to see how far she was willing to go with this plan. I needed proof that would stand up to scrutiny, because I knew that without evidence, this would tear my family apart. But most importantly, I needed to make sure that whatever evil she had planned for me would find its way back to her instead. The hotel manager stepped forward with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our guest of honor to address her friends and family. But first, let's all raise a glass in celebration." This was it. This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. I watched as guests began moving toward the drinks table, reaching for champagne glasses. The movement was casual, natural, people chatting and laughing as they selected their drinks for the toast. But Sarah positioned herself strategically, her eyes locked on me with predatory intensity. She was waiting for me to take that specific glass, the one she had poisoned. Mom. Michael appeared at my elbow, his face glowing with pride. Are you ready for your big moment? I hope you prepared something good. This crowd is expecting wisdom from the guest of honor. I've got a few words prepared, I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady. Your father helped me write them. Before. Michael's expression softened. He's here in spirit, Mom. I can feel it. If only he knew how prophetic those words were. Harold had always been protective of our family. If he were alive, he would have seen through Sarah's facade years ago. As we approached the drinks table, I could see Sarah's breathing quicken with anticipation. She stood with a group of other women. Elena, my daughter-in-law from David's, sighed, and Mrs. Patterson, my old boss's wife. They were discussing Sarah's dress. Sarah, that color is absolutely stunning on you, Elena was saying. Where did you find it? Oh, just a little boutique downtown, Sarah replied airily, though I knew it had cost more than most people's monthly car payment. I thought tonight deserved something special. Special indeed. Special enough to commit murder in. I reached the table and surveyed the champagne glasses. There were dozens of them, all looking identical. But I knew which one contained death. Sarah had positioned it perfectly, slightly forward from the others, exactly where someone approaching from my angle would naturally reach. Sarah, I said warmly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Would you be a dear and help me with the glasses? These old hands aren't as steady as they used to be, and I'd hate to spill champagne on my best dress. Her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Of course, Mom, she replied, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes sharp as razors. I'd be happy to help. This was her moment of triumph. In her mind, she was about to hand me the instrument of my own demise. And I was asking her to. Do it. Could you hand me that one? I pointed to a clean glass at the far end of the table, deliberately choosing one as far as possible from the poisoned flute. As she reached for the clean glass, her back turned to the table. I smoothly executed my plan. With movements that belied my 66 years, I picked up the poisoned glass and set it down directly in front of where Sarah had been standing. Then I rearranged several other glasses around it, making the switch appear natural. When Sarah turned back with the clean glass, I accepted it with a grateful smile. Thank you, sweetheart. You're always so helpful. She beamed at me, absolutely radiant with the knowledge that her plan was proceeding perfectly. Anything for family, Mom. The irony of her words would have been laughable if the situation weren't. So deadly serious. Everyone, please take a glass, Michael called out, raising his own champagne flute high. Let's gather around for Mom's speech. I watched with fascination as Sarah reached automatically for the glass directly in front of her, the very one she had poisoned for me. She lifted it with complete confidence, absolutely certain that her plan was working perfectly. In her mind, I was holding poison while she held harmless champagne. The guests formed a loose circle around me, their faces expectant and warm. These were people who had known me for decades, who trusted me, who had come to honor my career and wish me well in retirement. And standing among them was someone who wished me dead. Friends, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room. When I started working at Patterson & Associates 43 years ago, I never imagined I would be blessed with such wonderful colleagues, such dear friends, and such a loving family. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Sarah smiled brilliantly, raising her glass slightly in a premature gesture of celebration. She was practically glowing with anticipation. My Dear Harold used to say that integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. But tonight I want to talk about something else he believed in. That truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how cleverly someone tries to hide it. A few puzzled looks crossed some faces, but most guests simply nodded along, assuming this was leading to some philosophical point about honesty in business. Harold also believed that when someone digs a pit for another person, they often fall into it themselves. He had a lot of old-fashioned wisdom like that. Sarah's smile flickered, slightly, but she maintained her composure. After all, how could she know that I was talking directly about her? So, tonight let's toast not just to my retirement, but to the truth that always finds a way to surface, to justice that comes full circle, to the idea that what we put out into the world has a way of coming back to us. I raised my glass high, and everyone followed suit. Cheers! Cheers! The room chorused and glasses rose in unison. I brought my clean glass to my lips and took a small sip, watching Sarah over the rim. She lifted her glass with supreme confidence, absolutely certain that her plan was unfolding flawlessly. The champagne touched her lips. She took a drink. And then, for just a moment, the most beautiful expression of pure confusion crossed her face. At first, Sarah tried to maintain her composure. She set down the glass with what she clearly hoped looked like casual satisfaction, but I could see the first seeds of panic beginning to sprout in her features. Her face, which had been flushed with excitement and anticipation, started to lose its color. The guests were still chatting happily, discussing my speech and complimenting the champagne, but I kept my attention focused entirely on Sarah, watching as she pressed a hand to her stomach, then to her throat. "That was beautiful, Mom," David said, approaching with his wife Elena and their children. "Dad would have loved hearing you talk about truth and justice. He always said you were the most honest woman he knew. Your grandfather was a wise man," I told my grandchildren, but my eyes never left Sarah. "He taught me that patience is often the key to seeing justice done." Sarah had moved slightly away from the crowd, her emerald clutch pressed against her stomach. Beads of perspiration were forming on her forehead, despite the comfortable temperature in the ballroom. "Sarah?" Michael noticed his wife's sudden distress. "Honey, are you feeling all right? You look a little pale." She tried to speak, but only managed a strangled sound. Her emerald dress, which had seemed so elegant and sophisticated, now seemed to cling to her uncomfortably. She tugged at the neckline as if it were choking her. "I think," she began, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "I think I need some air." But even as she spoke, her legs began to wobble. The champagne glass in her hand started to shake, and I could see the exact moment when the terrible realization hit her. Her eyes met mine across the room, and in that instant, she knew. She knew that I had seen her. She knew that I had switched the glasses, and she knew that whatever poison she had prepared for me was now coursing through her own system. The color drained from her face completely, leaving her looking like a ghost in green silk. "Michael," she gasped, reaching for her husband's arm. "Something's wrong. Something's very wrong." The festive mood in the room began to shift as more guests noticed Sarah's distress. Conversations quieted, and concerned faces turned in her direction. "Should we call a doctor?" asked Mrs. Henderson, her motherly instincts kicking in despite not particularly liking Sarah. Sarah's legs buckled, and Michael rushed to catch her. That's when I decided it was time to speak. "I think," I said in a clear, steady voice that carried across the now silent room, "Sarah might be having a reaction to something she put in her drink." All eyes turned to me. Michael looked confused. Helena gasped, and several other guests exchanged bewildered glances. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Michael asked, still supporting his trembling wife. I walked calmly to where they stood, my hand steady despite the gravity of the situation. "I saw her, son, about 20 minutes ago during the video tribute. I watched your wife pour white powder from a small vial into a champagne glass. She intended for me to drink it." The silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Gasps echoed from various corners of the ballroom. Guests looked from me to Sarah in shock and disbelief, trying to process what they were hearing. That's impossible," Michael stammered, his face cycling through confusion, denial, and dawning horror. "Sarah would never. She wouldn't." But Sarah's guilty expression spoke louder than any denial could. She tried to stand straighter, attempted to summon indignation, but the evidence was written all over her face, and more importantly, it was working its way through her system. "You're lying," she managed to croak, but her voice lacked any conviction. "I would never. Why would I?" "The glass she prepared for me," I continued, my voice remaining calm and steady. "She drank from instead. Sometimes when we dig a pit for others, we fall into it ourselves." Patterson, despite his 82 years, stepped forward with the authority of a man who had spent decades in business dealings with all kinds of people. "Margaret, are you absolutely certain about what you saw?" I watched her take a small glass, vial from her purse, and pour its contents into a champagne flute. She placed that glass specifically where she knew I would reach for it during the toast. When I asked her to help me with the glasses, I made sure she ended up with her own poison. Instead, Jim Watson, who had known me for 15 years, nodded grimly. "Margaret's the most observant woman I know. If she says she saw it, she saw it." "Someone call 911, shouted Elena, reaching for her phone with shaking hands. Sarah tried to speak, again tried to defend herself, but her words came out as barely coherent whispers. I didn't mean for... It wasn't supposed to." "Wasn't supposed to what?" I asked quietly, approaching her with the same gentle demeanor I'd always shown her. "Kill me? Make me sick enough that you could control my affairs? Speed? Up your inheritance?" The room erupted in horrified murmurs. Guests backed away from Sarah as if her guilt were contagious. Some of the women covered their mouths in shock, while several of the men shook their heads in disgust. "Why, Sarah?" Michael's voice broke as he spoke. "For God's sake, why would you do this? She's my mother." But Sarah was beyond answering coherent questions. Whatever she had intended for me was now working its way through her own system, and paramedics were already on their way. Mrs. Patterson, who had dealt with plenty of drama in her 8 decades, stepped forward with surprising authority. "Young lady, you need to tell us exactly what you put in that glass. The paramedics will need to know how to treat you." Sarah's eyes darted around the room, looking for escape, for sympathy, for some way out of the trap she had laid for herself. But everywhere she looked, she saw faces filled with shock, disgust, and disappointment. "It was just," she whispered, "just something to make her sick, not to kill her, just sick enough that—" "That what?" David demanded, his protective instincts toward his mother overriding his usual politeness. "Sick enough that you could what?" But Sarah couldn't finish her sentences. Her legs gave out completely, and she collapsed into one of the hotel's elegant chairs, her emerald dress now seeming more like a prison than a fashion statement. The sound of sirens grew louder outside, and hotel security entered the ballroom, having been called by the front desk when someone reported a medical emergency. "I need everyone to step back," said the lead security officer, a man in his 50s who had clearly dealt with unusual situations before. The paramedics are coming up now. As we waited for medical help, I found myself looking around at the faces of my friends and family. Some showed shock, others disgust, but many showed something else, a deep sadness that such evil could exist within a family. Michael stood apart from his wife, his face a mask of devastation. In the span of 5 minutes, his world had completely collapsed. His wife wasn't just unfaithful or dishonest. She was a would-be murderer, Mom, he said quietly, approaching me with tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry. I never knew. I never suspected. You couldn't have known, son, I replied, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Evil is often very good at wearing a beautiful mask. The paramedics arrived with their equipment, immediately focusing on Sarah's condition. What did she ingest? Asked the lead paramedic, a professional woman in her 40s. She won't tell us exactly, I replied, but she admitted to putting some kind of powder in a champagne glass, intending to poison me. The glass was switched and she drank it herself. The paramedic's eyebrows rose, but she maintained her professional demeanor. We need to get her to the hospital immediately. Has she vomited? Lost consciousness? As they worked to stabilize Sarah for transport, police officers entered the ballroom. The situation had gone from a medical emergency to a criminal investigation. Detective Morrison, a woman about my age with kind but serious eyes, approached me. Ms. Harrison, I understand you witnessed someone attempting to poison you. That's correct, Detective. I saw my daughter-in-law tamper with a champagne glass intended for me. And you're certain about what you observed? I've been watching people and analyzing details for 43 years in business. Detective, I know what I saw. As Sarah was wheeled out on a stretcher, conscious but clearly affected by whatever substance she had ingested, she managed one last look in my direction. But instead of remorse or apology, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Pure hatred, even caught in her own trap, even facing the consequences of her evil plan. She hated me for surviving it. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, which had been transformed into a celebration of my career and life, was now a crime scene. Police tape sectioned off the drinks table, and Detective Morrison was carefully collecting evidence, including the vial Sarah had dropped during her collapse, which had rolled under the table. My guests, understandably shaken, began to leave after giving their contact information to the police. Many stopped to express their shock and support. Margaret, in 40 years of business, I've never seen anything like this, said Patterson, shaking his head. That young woman seemed so charming, so devoted to Michael. Mrs. Henderson, bless her heart, was more direct. I never liked her, she declared. There was always something calculating in her eyes. Poor Michael, though. This will destroy him. She was right about Michael. My eldest son sat in one of the hotel chairs, his head in his hands, trying to process the fact that his wife of 5 years had attempted to murder his mother. The preliminary field test suggests it was digitalis, Detective Morrison informed me quietly. Comes from foxglove plants. In small doses, it's used for heart medication. In larger doses. She didn't need to finish. We both knew that Sarah had researched something that would mimic a heart attack in a woman my age, something that might not be immediately detected as poison. She's alive and stable, the detective continued, but she'll be facing charges of attempted murder. The evidence is overwhelming. We found the vial. We have your eyewitness account. And she partially confessed in front of multiple witnesses. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of police interviews, legal proceedings, and family counseling. The investigation revealed the extent of Sarah's financial desperation and her growing resentment toward me. Her internet search history was damning. How to inherit faster, natural-looking poisons, heart attack symptoms in elderly women, and dozens of similar queries dating back months. She had been planning this for a long time. They found evidence of gambling debts totaling $85,000, credit cards maxed out on luxury purchases, and forged loan applications using Michael's name and my house as collateral. In her twisted mind, my death would solve all her financial problems instantly. The divorce papers were filed within a week. Michael, devastated but resolute, couldn't forgive someone who had tried to murder his mother for money. I feel like I never knew her at all, Mom. He told me, "How do you live with someone for 5 years and never see their true nature?" Sarah was sentenced to 8 years in prison for attempted murder, with the possibility of parole in 6. The judge noted that, while her plan had been premeditated and calculated, the fact that she had inadvertently poisoned herself rather than her intended victim was a form of poetic justice rarely seen in criminal court. But the real aftermath wasn't legal. It was emotional. Our family was shattered, not by death as Sarah had intended, but by the revelation of such deep betrayal. Trust, once broken in such a fundamental way, takes years to rebuild. Michael struggled with guilt and self-doubt. How could I not have seen it, Mom? What kind of husband was I that my own wife was planning murder, and I had no idea? We spent many evenings talking, sometimes until dawn, about the nature of evil, about how good people can be deceived by those who wear masks of kindness and love. I shared stories about Harold, about how he had always been suspicious of Sarah's motives, and how he had tried to warn us in gentle ways that we hadn't understood at the time. "Your father saw something we missed," I told him. "Men often have better instincts about women who are using them. But you couldn't have known the depths of Sarah's deception. Evil is often very skilled at appearing good." The retirement I had planned, filled with bridge games, travel, and time with grandchildren, became something different. I found myself volunteering with a program that helped families affected by domestic violence and betrayal. I spoke at workshops about recognizing manipulative behavior and protecting vulnerable family members. 6 months after the party, I received a letter from Sarah in prison. I debated whether to read it, ultimately deciding that understanding her mindset might help me help others in similar situations. The letter was not an apology. Instead, it was filled with justifications and resentments. She wrote about how I had hoarded wealth, while she and Michael struggled in their modest apartment. She claimed I had been selfish with my money, not generous enough with gifts and financial help. She blamed me for her gambling debts, saying the stress of waiting for inheritance had driven her to desperate measures. Reading her words, I realized that Sarah was still trapped in the same twisted thinking that had led her to attempt murder. She saw herself as the victim, me as the villain, and her actions as justified responses to perceived wrongs. I never responded to her letter, but I kept it as a reminder of how far a person can fall when they let greed and resentment consume their soul. As I sit here now, 2 years later, looking out at the garden Harold and I planted together 30 years ago, I reflect on that night and its aftermath. The roses Harold loved are blooming again, and I can almost hear his voice in the wind, reminding me that good ultimately triumphs over evil, even when the victory comes at a great cost. My retirement has been peaceful in ways I never expected. The house feels less empty now that the shadow of Sarah's presence has been lifted. Michael has started dating again. A kind librarian named Rebecca, who loves children and has no interest in our family's financial situation. David's children spend more time with me now, and I treasure every moment with them. That night taught me that betrayal often comes from those closest to us, from people we trust and welcome into our families with open hearts. But it also taught me that when you live with integrity and trust in divine justice, the traps set by the wicked often spring back on themselves. Evil has a way of devouring itself, of becoming its own punishment. Sarah's plan was perfect except for one crucial flaw. She underestimated the very person she was trying to destroy. Every Sunday, when I raise my glass of wine at dinner with David's family, I remember that night when champagne meant to end my life became the instrument of justice. Instead, sometimes the most important victories come not from fighting back, but from simply stepping aside and letting evil defeat itself. Harold always said that the truth has a way of coming out, and patience is often the key to seeing justice done. On that golden evening of my retirement party, surrounded by people I loved and one who wished me dead, the truth revealed itself in the most poetic way possible. Through the very glass she had prepared for my demise. Justice, I learned, sometimes wears an emerald green dress and drinks from the wrong glass, and sometimes the most profound revenge is simply allowing someone to fall into the pit they have dug for you. The last thing I'll say about that night is this. Harold was there with me. I felt his presence as surely as I feel the sun on my face each morning. He had always protected our family, and even from beyond the grave, he was still protecting me. Perhaps he guided my hand when I switched those glasses. Perhaps he whispered the wisdom I needed to see through Sarah's deception. All I know is that on the night meant to honor my life's work, I learned that the greatest work of all is simply living with enough integrity that when evil comes calling, it destroys itself against the rock of your character. And that, my friends, is a lesson worth retiring on.